Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a truly big day here at PAC 14. One of my best friends, a guy I admired for many years, still admire him, Bill Robinson, is in the house. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed seeing you again. It's been a while because of the pandemic.
Now, you are the Director of Public Relations at University of Maryland Eastern Shore, which is a great job. But more important to me and to us, I think, is that you are one of the great reporters ever, in the history of the Daily Times. And when I go back and look at the clips from the papers from the years that you worked there, 79 through about 85.
That's right.
You really documented this community like no one else ever did. There was no one, if you want to know what happened in this community in those really pivotal years for our city and our county, Bill Robinson was the byline.
Well, I appreciate that compliment. That makes me feel good. That period of professional development for me was a real learning curve. There were a number of seasoned journalists in that newsroom who I watched carefully and tried to learn something from each one of them every day. And I think probably in the last 2 or 3 years, I started to hit my stride. And then in the early 1985, an opportunity came along to pursue the career of journalism in Columbia, South Carolina. I ended up staying at the Capital City newspaper there for 23 years. So,
and it's called The State.
Yes.
And it was one of the great newspapers of the South.
Yes. It sometimes underappreciated. One of the things that perhaps your viewers might find of interest, my understanding is that it was the last daily newspaper in America that would run a list on the front page every day of all the names on the obituary page.
Right.
And one of the favorite stories that I encountered when I lived there was if you ask somebody, how are you doing today? And they would say, well, I picked up the state newspaper and I didn't see my name on the front page, so I guess it's a good day. And of course, that's when I had one of those Wizard of Oz moments. Dorothy, you're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
I wasn't in Maryland anymore. And, one of the things that I encountered here in that era was as an education reporter, the school boards were appointed in that era,
right,
in the late 20th century. When I moved to South Carolina, most of them were elected, and boy, that's a real different cultural change,
right,
both, personally and professionally. So I had a lot of good experiences working here at the Daily Times under the leadership of Mel Todvin and Dick Fleming and our friend Jim Nelson and the legendary late Mike Mize.
Mike Mize.
So those guys and John Bosman, those are the kinds of guys who had been around the block a couple times, and so I was fortunate to have those as mentors. I kind of consider my time at the my tenure at the Daily Times almost like a graduate school, although I don't have a master's to show for it.
Right.
But you learn how to write an obituary in 20 minutes because deadline's coming.
Right.
And that was the kind of stuff we did back then.
Well, you went to Y High, and
That's
then
correct.
you went to University of Maryland. You're one of the great Diamondback staffs of all time. You really were. And when I got to the Diamondback in 1982, I mean, there was a legend about the people that had been on your staff. The Diamondback is the student paper, 5-day daily then. Mm-hmm. Just an amazing product. Then you went to Hagerstown for a while, and then you broke back into jail by coming back to Salisbury to try to make your community a better place, I think.
Well, to even do sort of a pre-Star Wars version of what you just described, I went to Glen Avenue Elementary School when it was just called Glen Avenue School.
Right.
And I was in the 6th grade there. I was on the newspaper staff. There was a little newspaper, and it was called the Gas Line, GAS, Glen Avenue School. And one of my closest friends from school's mother was a teacher there, and when she passed away, he was going through her effects, and he found a copy of that little elementary school newspaper and gave it to me. And so I have a copy of I don't know I can't remember what the article was I wrote. I have it saved somewhere, and I've scanned it, so it's electronic now. So I guess you could say the newspaper bug bit me early in the 6th grade, and then I got over to Wycomico Junior High School at the time, is what it was called. I worked for that newspaper, and in fact, I was the sports editor at the Wycomico Junior High School newspaper, and my boss is my wife.
Wow.
Jane Langrel.
Okay.
She was the editor of that paper.
Wow.
Then when I got to Y High, I joined the Y High News, and I was fortunate enough to be chosen the editor of the Y High News. And I later found out after Jane and I got married in the early 2000s, I found out from my father-in-law, Orland, the late Orland Langrel, that he was the editor of the Why
Wow.
News. So, small town America.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon moment, but so anyway, I as a youngster, the newspaper work always was of interest to me. And then I went off to College Park, and that's the big leagues there. So
It was big leagues.
Yeah.
I mean, for students, the student newspaper was even better than the journalism program, I think, when I got there.
one could argue that.
Yeah.
I don't know that's the case now. They've gone digital, and
Yeah.
I really kind of lost touch with it. But I appreciate you saying what you did about. I was just a minor player. I was sort of like the third string punter at the Diamondback, but I enjoyed working there, and plus we got paid.
Right. We got an honorarium, yeah.
Yeah. So that was.
Yeah, I was the wire editor, and I got $5,000 a year, which was just amazing. Yeah.
I think the deal was when I was there, you would get $6 an article if you had a byline on it, and $4 an article if you wrote it, but the editors didn't give you a byline on it. So
Right.
That the economics of student journalism.
And back then, pictures at the VU were probably 50 cents, so you were making some
Oh
real
no,
money.
I never went to the VU. What are you talking about? You might want to explain what the VU is.
No one needs to know what the VU is. The Rendezvous Inn, it's world famous.
Right, a watering hole, a campus watering hole. So.
When you were at the Daily, one of the key beats, you had the city beat. You covered the city, you covered school board, and then anything else that they throw at you, obviously, like all of us at a small paper. But you wrote a lot about downtown, and downtown then was at a key phase. The mall had come, they had closed Main Street, they had created the plaza to try to compete with a retail thing, and that was not working. And it was just dawning on them that wasn't going to work when you were a reporter, and they were trying to figure out what to do with downtown. And now we have a downtown that's completely, I feel, energized and been redone again. What is it, 45 years later, 50 years later?
Yeah, it's most of my adult lifetime, I can tell you that.
Exactly. What do you think of then and now? What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I'm glad to see that Main Street reopened to traffic, and again, this is nostalgia time. As a little kid, when I was in the Cub Scouts, we used to be in the Christmas parade, and the Christmas parade would go right down Main Street, and that was a big deal. It was like it was like New York City's Canyon of Heroes.
Yeah.
Going down Main Street, the Christmas parade was a big deal, and so it's nice to see that now, and hopefully that will perhaps change the dynamics. I think with the shift that people are participating into online shopping, that having that Main Street is nostalgic, and also gets people out and walking around, because malls are all look alike, and concrete, asphalt paving, and you have to go in a central entrance to get to other stores, and I think that has some value. And I would add this. My wife and I are big fans of HGTV, and there's one of the newer shows is this show based out of Laurel, Mississippi, called Hometown, and they just did a series of 6 episodes where they went to a town in Alabama, relatively small community, and showed them things that they can do to revitalize their downtown and some of their neighborhoods and whatnot. And while I was watching that, I was having these flashbacks, not knowing that you were going to bring this up today. And there's some. It can be formulaic, but you also have to be creative and think outside the box. I'll give you an example.
Right.
This TV show talked about stringing lights up on Main Street, and not just for Christmas, but making it. If the stores were open late on a Friday night, have the lights on Friday night, that kind of stuff. And I know is it Third Fridays?
Yeah.
They're trying to do those kinds of things.
Yeah.
There, so. And it helps to have Sheryl Crow show up, too.
Well, you mentioned Laurel, Mississippi. The Laurel Leader Call was one of the great Thompson newspapers.
Yeah.
And when Thompson sold it, the new owners closed the Laurel Leader Call. And we used to call the Laurel Leader Call just for fun to hear the woman answer the phone, because she had that great Mississippi.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that at my advanced age pains me greatly, as what I would describe myself as a pothole journalist. I write about the pothole in front of your house because you care about it. And hopefully you'll read my article if I wrote about it. And a lot of the smaller communities are losing that newspaper identity. Gravitating online is one thing. That's one reason why I think what the work that you're trying to do is to revitalize at least a weekly newspaper that is built around pothole journalism with the Independent is important. People need to know what's going on at the school board. Are they changing the meters on Main Street to 25 cents an hour from 15 cents or whatever the heck it is? That was the kind of stuff, the bread and butter stuff that I used to write about. But looping back to the downtown revitalization, I was given carte blanche to write about that revitalization effort.
It's called RUDAT, the
Yeah,
RUDAT report.
and they brought in all these outside experts who came in with writing on the wall and that kind of stuff. And I'm just cranking the articles out.
Yeah.
And the tail end of that week, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, was a meeting at the Civic Center.
It was a great series he did. You even went to New Jersey where they had done one of their projects.
Yeah,
go ahead.
in Trenton, New Jersey. Yeah. But at the end of this week of the outside experts coming in and saying, here's a roadmap we think you ought to consider following to invigorate Main Street. There was a meeting at the Civic Center, and I covered the meeting. And I was blown away and humbled by the number of people who showed up. I think it was north of 500 people showed up. And I thought to myself, well, maybe somebody is reading all these articles.
And everything they knew about it was what they had read in the paper.
And I want to say at the time, I think there was just one television station in town, and they couldn't. They were having trouble wrapping their head around how do you illustrate that, and they didn't have a helicopter then. So.
Right.
But they,
Someone you covered who, people don't remember him. It's funny, Hunter Nelms, our sheriff, just died yesterday. And I was trying to get a list of people for my reporter to call to react to Hunter passing. And everyone I could think of has passed away. But one of the great people who has passed away was W. Paul Martin Jr., our mayor. You covered him for a long time. What are your memories of Paul Martin? People don't remember Paul Martin. I certainly remember him.
Oh, absolutely. Paul Martin was cut his teeth as a volunteer firefighter, and he knew every little nook and cranny of Salisbury, all the alleyways, because of being a volunteer firefighter. And there's something to be said about volunteer firefighters, and they know what's going on in the community. And in fact, one of the people I work for said, if you ever want to know what's going on, just get to know all the volunteer firefighter chiefs in the county, and they'll steer you in the right direction. They won't want to be quoted. And so knowing being given that advice, and knowing Paul Martin's origins as a volunteer firefighter, and then he got into politics, and that was in the era when D's and R's were Wicomico County and Salisbury was more Democratic leaning and whatnot. And so, and I want to say when I first started covering City Hall at the Daily Times, Elmer Ruark was still the mayor, but he had announced he was retiring, and it was, and everybody said, "Step aside, Paul Martin's going to run," because he had been the council chair. So anyway, but he was a big, burly fella, bald on the top, had a Lefty Drizel hairstyle, and
loud
and boisterous, but really cared about the community in a way that I think kind of shaped how I approached my job in journalism, not only in Salisbury, but also when I moved on to Columbia, South Carolina. And I had a great deal of respect for him, and I was glad I learned from afar that they had named the courthouse after
the state service building.
State service building. I'm sorry. And it was deserving because he put in 30 plus years in public service. And for those people who don't know, he was a roving administrator for the Acme grocery store.
He's a butcher, basically.
Yeah, he started off like that, but he got promoted and would go check on all the Acme stores like that. So those kinds of jobs inform people. If you're working in the grocery business, you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
If you're jumping on a fire truck, you're seeing people at their worst moment. Those kinds of things, I think, informed him as a politician and made him an effective leader. He had a poker face. If he gave off that gruff, hey, boss, like that. But if you got him in a weak moment, he'd go like, he's just doing his job.
Yeah.
He's okay, guy. That kind of stuff. So, but you talk about naming buildings. Just recently, word surfaced that the county was going to name the library after Paul Sarbanes, and that's another example. Unfortunately, he passed away before that announcement. But that kind of brings me back full circle to my decision to go into the newspaper business. In the early 70s, Watergate was a big deal. And Woodward and Bernstein were a big deal.
Yeah.
And I can remember watching those hearings for the House of Representatives and watching us, hey, that's Paul Sarbanes there.
Yeah.
He's from Salisbury, even though he's representing Baltimore. You know, there was sort of this community pride aspect, you know,
Yeah.
17, 18 years old at the time and like that. And so, and that's really about probably when my interest in current events and public affairs accelerated. And I really didn't know that much about Paul Sarbanes until I got older, and you know, I found out that he was a Rhodes Scholar, and you know, that kind of stuff. And I thought to myself, man, he might be the most accomplished graduate
Absolutely.
of Wicomico High School in the history of the school.
Yeah, and you think like, because I went to Y High too, like we sat at the same desk that Paul Sarbanes did, and
Yeah.
he achieved so much, and here we are, you know, not achieving anything basically.
Yeah, well, we're just a couple of ink-stained wretches, as they
Yeah.
used to say back
Yeah.
in the 20th century. So I was pleased to see that happen, and fortunately, his brother Anthony is
Tony.
was still with us, and I have contact with him from time to time, and I can remember when I was working at I was a student at Y High. He was the principal. And I would get called into the principal's office from time to time, not because I did anything wrong, but he wanted to know what we were working on
At the paper?
at the monthly version of the newspaper.
Yeah.
You know, and of course you get called in, and Tony Sarbanes is looking across that desk at you. You know, like so I probably rolled over more than I should have, but I was just an impressionable young aspiring journalist at the time. But they were good experiences, and so it's been interesting having moved away and come back and kind of see how things have evolved, what people's perspectives are and stuff.
One of the lines I have that's true, and I'm embarrassed, and my family gets very upset when I say this, but I love the Daily Times more than my children. The Daily Times was always the first thing in my life, and I have opinions about the direction of the paper and the industry. I have a feeling you're similar. Maybe you don't love it as much as I do, but the sort of the degradation, just what's happened to the industry. How does it feel to look at the Daily Times now?
Well, I like that feeling of picking up the newspaper and holding it and reading it, and of course it's not as robust. If you go back and look at something, you know, you look at them online, and like every once in a while I will go over to not lately, but I've gone over to the library and looking for old articles about the University of Maryland or Maryland State in that microfilm.
Yeah.
And you start looking at you scrolling through, and you go, oh my gosh, there were 28 pages of this newspaper.
Full of
36.
content. So much content.
And just as an aside here, one day I was looking for an article about the Maryland State College, and I happened upon the byline of an Associated Press reporter who was my boss in Columbia, South Carolina.
Wow.
And he had an unusual last name, and as I was scrolling through, I went, wait a minute, what's that? And I rolled back, and the guy was based in Chicago, and sure enough, this had a Chicago byline, Associated Press. And that was on the front page of the Daily Times, probably when I was a youngster, so not when I worked there. But it's what I told people who I left behind in the newspaper business is that if it wasn't for newspapers, Richard Nixon would have served 2 terms.
Absolutely.
And so hopefully the industry will right itself, and maybe publications.
and I don't mean to fault anyone at the Daily
No.
now. They're doing the best they can with what
Absolutely.
they have. You know.
Absolutely.
But I just think our community needs a strong daily newspaper because I believe in it so much. And also, I can't do everything by myself at my little weekly. You know, the community needs a really dynamic daily
We
newspaper.
touched on this earlier. What's happening at City Hall, what's happening in the county government, county council, what's happening in the school system. They probably had the biggest chunk of the budget, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and to some degree, the police and courts. Those are sort of the foundational aspects of what I call local community journalism, and the resources that community newspapers like the Daily Times have. They just don't have the ability to monitor those things on a regular basis. You know, when you and I were coming along, you know, you were the City Hall beat reporter, and now they have new titles, and they're more sweeping, and sometimes they're a little difficult to discern as to what the expectations are. So
Yeah, we used to do stories, we called them, boring but important.
Yeah.
But it was our job to cover the sewer hearing, because
Yeah.
you were going to get a bill in the mail, and
Well,
you
and-
didn't want it to be a mystery when it showed up.
And as you know, when you were writing about the installation, was it of a sewer line out by the airport?
Exactly.
And how many obnoxious text messages did you get from me? But they were all tongue in cheek because I'd been there, done that.
Yeah.
So I know the importance of it. But a quick war story about from the front lines of the Daily Times when I was working there. It was owned by that Canadian/English Operation Thompson.
Thompson newspapers.
And somebody in corporate handed down this edict that you had to have X number of local stories percentage-wise every day. And so the editors at the Daily Times at the time said, okay, we got to meet that goal. So if I went to a city council meeting and there were 12 items on the agenda, I had to write 12 stories. Now, one or two of them would be byline stories, and the other 10 would be briefs.
Right, you write 2 big ones and a bunch of briefs. brief
Little,
package.
and
Yeah.
and so it was an afternoon newspaper at the time.
Yeah.
And so the city council used to meet at Monday nights. And so after the Monday night meeting was over, I'd go back to the Daily Times. I had a key to the building, go in and write every story
Till 3 in the morning.
until 3 in the morning. And then when the editors came in, it would be sitting there in
Yeah.
that electronic queue. And,
Yeah.
and that afternoon, there would be like City Hall briefs, and there'd be 5 or 6 paragraphs. Sometimes they'd carry some of them over.
They'd run them Sunday.
Yes, so like that. So, okay, that's, that might not be that interesting to the people watching this show, but
It's fascinating to me. I mean,
But
but we
those are-
covered every inch of it.
yeah. So if it moved at City Hall,
Yeah.
our marching orders were to write about it, and that's just not there anymore, for obvious reasons. I guess Mark Zuckerberg has figured it out on Facebook. That's what's more important. So,
Yeah, the great content provider doesn't do any of its own content.
and no.
So you're back in town. You've come back here, I guess, like a sunset tour in terms of your career.
Yes.
You and your wife live in the park. Very interested in the community, very involved in some stuff. What's it like living in Salisbury as an adult, as you become like an old man, if I dare say?
Well, it's interesting to watch people who are 20, 30 years younger than us sort of being in charge, and a lot of head scratching going like, really? For instance, this is probably politically incorrect, but we put in bike lanes all over town, and I just don't see a lot of people riding bicycles with those funky hats and the tight shorts. And
Build
stuff like
it and they will come.
yeah. So at some point you have to say, okay, and I know there's open space money and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But but it is what it is, and that's a terrible cliche. So which doesn't mean anything. But if you would have proposed bike lanes 30 years ago, people would say, like, yeah, go right out in the country, go
Right.
go out there behind, on a 60-foot road and ride a bicycle if that's what you want to do.
Well, and I tell people because I ride a bike a lot, and a 300-pound guy riding a bike is unusual. But I used to have to ride Smith Street, Light Street to get through the middle of Camden, and now there's a great bicycle lane there
Yeah.
on Waverly. So for me, I completely get it.
Okay, well, my Schwinn doesn't. That's in my garage. The tires are flat, but I don't begrudge. I mean, you need to get out and exercise. Look, I think we could all, both of us, could afford to get
Yeah.
out there and ride that bicycle a little more often. So, I alluded to the fact earlier about the elected school boards versus appointed school boards, and I was not in favor of going to elected school boards here in the county because I saw what had happened in South Carolina, and I was on the front lines of a lot of nastiness going back and forth, and I just don't see the value in R versus D politicizing school boards. Okay, you can say, well, everybody runs as an independent, but we all know that there's coding that goes along with that in
Right.
terms of the color of your signs and that kind of stuff. That bothers me, but I'm just one voice, and I don't have kids in the school. My grandsons are not even school age yet, so my opinion may change on that down the road. But
Yeah, when you covered school board, it was brutal then.
Yeah.
They were appointed, but there was a party balance.
Right.
But now that it seems the board is quiet, and I think it's because they appreciate the job that the school system does.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a good superintendent, so I think that makes it easier for them.
well, Donna Hanlon is a contemporary of mine.
Exactly, yes.
In the sense that she went to James
went to
M.
Bennett,
Bennett,
yes.
while Jane and I were at Y Comico High School. Gene Malone, who's on the school board,
Right.
was I think a year behind me at Y High. So
Right.
those are my peers who bring some life experience to the job, and hopefully they're setting the tone for the people who come along behind them, and they're mentoring some of the next generation that are coming along to run the school system.
What's Salisbury's future? What do you hope for Salisbury?
That's a good question. I'd like to see it evolve into a place where the college is appreciated more, the Salisbury University, and to the lesser degree the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, which is a land-grant school just down the road. I don't know that it's a college town, and that people get turned off by that term, but I think that dynamic brings a certain level of interest and activity. Now, of course, they're very good at it with their athletic programs there, and they provide that kind of entertainment. But I can remember as a kid growing up, I saw Dick Gregory at Holloway Hall when he was quite a controversial figure, and I don't know that those people are coming through town. And of course, they want big
Right.
honorariums
Right.
to speak, and I certainly don't begrudge Salisbury University for not paying somebody $10,000 or $15,000 to come
Right.
speak for 45 minutes. So, but I think the university can be the cornerstone for the future of the. And from what I can tell, they built up, to a point where I think they're recognized regionally and nationally as being a solid.
Right.
Small to medium-sized college, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Bill Robinson, thanks for being here today. I would love to have you back sometime. We've got a million stories we could tell people about. I always think that the old Daily Times newsroom could be like an episode of Barney Miller with all those great characters in that room, and all of them inspired you and me. We actually listened to them and wanted to be like them in a way.
I had a former colleague send me a text message about a week or so ago saying, "Who knew that our newsroom in Columbia, South Carolina, was the forerunner to The Office?"
Right, exactly.
And
Yeah.
I'm going, "Oh my gosh, he's right."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thank you for inviting me to tell war stories about growing up in Salisbury.
Thanks for being here. I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent Newspaper. Another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and One-on-One. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.